people who were really looking at it being fully historic or a replica of the past, but more with a sort of historic feel.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Thoughts? Does this, I mean, particularly Ben, does this agree? Do you see this as what you do when you talk to your customers about biking and infrastructure?
I mean, yeah, our customers are very interested in the bike infrastructure, unsurprisingly, but yeah, I think I guess my question would be on some of these, especially the first two that were on the last slide. Just like how do you, is the total population size or the total survey respondents here is very big. So how much weight do you put on a
Yeah,
distribution at top right?
absolutely. This is just a one picture of a group of people. Caroline, do you know how many actually that adds up to? I didn't even know how many stars we ended up getting.
I did not count, and some people put stars on some of them and some people didn't. So I think each one's a little bit different.
It's like 25 if I'm counting quickly. So yeah, it's only 25 people responding on that. So yeah, take it as with a lot of grain of salt, but it is a picture of the people who were showing up at that event. Anyway.
Sure. Um, on the next slide, where it talks about the preference in design, I'm assuming they're not mutually exclusive. I mean, I would love to see more pedestrian and bike infrastructure, but the only way to actually get to Cascade Locks is to drive. I mean,
Right.
so I guess try to balance those two.
Well, that's the transportation system plan nexus. That is always the challenge, isn't it? When we're looking at the streetscape, we're going to be talking about some opportunities later to improve the pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure without degrading in any way the car infrastructure. And I think in that case, that will be really what we're looking at. I also have some recommendations later about parking, which might be part of what people were talking about with car infrastructure. Because no, you're right. We're not going to get to Cascade Locks without some kind of vehicle, be it public transit or private.
Um, hold on. I mean, there's lots of people that bike here, and there's thousands of hikers that hike here all year
PCT,
round. So
Dev,
I
yeah,
don't think
true.
that's accurate. And with the new bike infrastructure going in to connect to Hood River, you're going to be able to bike and get tourists going from the Oregon coast all the way to past the Dalles on bike safe infrastructure. So I think there's a lot of people that get through here without cars.
You know, I think,
Actually,
Dave,
a very, very large amount of people.
yeah, I think that is actually a really fabulous point, and maybe something that we make a recommendation as well to be included in the upcoming TSP. If we could do some kind of actual survey to figure out how many hikers and bikers come into Cascade Locks every year, particularly to use to help justify some of the modifications that we might like to see and funding from ODOT. It's a great idea.
Yeah, so the PCT has 7,000 permits that got filed this year for people hiking it. So there's 7,000 people that said they were going to start the trail. Whether or not they made it to Cascade Locks is a different thing.
Right. Yeah.
On the Main Street open house in June, under what were challenges, of course, lack of parking came up. And then, so of course, this has come up before, the grocery needs updating, and then somebody drew that they wanted a grocery store with fresh food, sidewalks, having maintained sidewalks seemed important, and then owner maintenance or it said consistent aesthetic and owner maintenance of the buildings, so those were just a couple of things. I don't know if they were specifically mentioned in what you said.
Fabulous. Denise, I was writing that down. I think I missed the second one. But after talking about the grocery store updating, what was the second one on your list?
Parking.
Parking by itself. Okay. Because parking's always a problem.
Owner maintenance and
yeah.
Somebody said infill.
Okay. Cool. Thank you. When was that? What was the date?
That was June 25th.
Cool. All right. Um, let's go on, Caroline, because I just want to give you a snapshot of the survey that is currently open and the findings that we're seeing. I can print a full survey report of the 134 surveys to date if you're interested, or give you all a link to look at an online version of it. But we are planning on keeping this open through early September. So we're not going to finalize a survey report for a couple of weeks. But to date, we have 134 surveys. I would love to get that number over 200. So another push would be fun. I know the community picnic is coming up and maybe we can actually get it over 200 at that point. It is available online in English and Spanish, by the way, at this point. So if you have and want to help advertise that some more, that'd be great. There were some definitely key themes that are coming out of the current, and it will be similar to what we heard in the open house and what Main Street has heard, that people are dissatisfied with the diversity of business and housing options. The primary thing that they were dissatisfied with or very dissatisfied was diversity of services. The most important things that people wanted downtown was the redevelopment of vacant or older buildings. That was 90 of the 134 survey people put that as their most important thing. 76 of the 134 surveys, so over half, put encouraging a broader mix of businesses and services as the most important thing that they would like to see in downtown in the future. And then under that was attracting new businesses. So you start to see a lot of just economic development as a general concern about downtown. Next slide, unless there are comments. The survey has a lot of questions. I didn't try to give you a snapshot of all of them, but I wanted to show you that I thought it was interesting, the desired community assets. The majority of the people actually um, indicated that they're interested in outdoor market and a food cart pod, public parking, and a walking trail to Marine Park as their primary things. So each one of those three got more than 50% of respondents saying that they wanted them. And then when we asked if people were confident in their ability to navigate the permit process, if they were going to be expanding or remodeling or building downtown, 21 people of the 134 said they were confident. 79 said they were either nervous or unsure, which were sort of in the middle. But then 20 said they were terrified, which I kind of love, which kind of balances out with your confidence. So really, most of them are somewhere in the middle, nervous or unsure. That kind of reflects into some of the code modifications that we'll be looking at, and how we can shift more of that nervous or unsure up into the confident level. Questions? Thoughts? Yeah. Okay.
Assuming when they say public parking, they probably want free parking.
Hmm. There was not a really question as we didn't try to evaluate whether or not they'd be willing to pay for that parking, which might be a separate question. Um, I think off-street parking and public off-street parking was a primary. So, so um, I, Carolyn, you want to go to the next slide?
Yeah.
All
So
right.
I'm going to be talking about existing development. This is a zoning map of downtown Cascade Locks, and we've highlighted where there are vacant lots and where there are vacant buildings in downtown Cascade Locks. So as you can see, there are quite a few vacant lots and quite a few vacant buildings, some non-conforming uses, and we don't really have any mixed-use developments in here. Here are some photos of the vacant lots. We have on the top, the two sort of at the top of Wanapa. And then at the bottom left, we see the vacant lot next to the old Chinese restaurant. And then next to that, we have the vacant lot next to the grocery store.
And we recognize that a lot of these are associated with other developments, but they're infill opportunities.
And then we have some vacant buildings here. We have the old fire station at the top. We have the Chinese restaurant to the left and the old hardware store, art studio, gallery to the right.
when we're talking, some of these photos were just to illustrate some of the concerns that we had. You can keep going, Caroline, it's fine. Um, so they're not necessarily representative of all of them. So if you're seeing things that are missing, it's not because we were trying to capture all of the vacant buildings. We were just trying to give a highlight of the ones that stand out. Um, and then, of course, when we're looking at other issues that were identified as part of our tour and through the various other reviews that we've done and the conversations that we've had, obviously limited facilities for pedestrians and bicycle use is a big one, and the lack of crosswalks on Wanapa and how much we can modify what ODOT is going to allow us to do is a question, but will certainly be something that we can actually bring forward to ODOT as part of this process to see if we can get more crosswalks. We certainly continue to have some sidewalk issues, some sidewalks like the one that is across from the hotel that is really narrow, some that are really damaged through age. And then we have additional access management issues with just really long curb cuts and accesses to properties. The gas station is just an example of one of them, but a couple of these, particularly drive-through locations, have really substantial amount of what's basically rolled curb for driveway accesses rather than traditional sidewalks. So you have some definite accessibility issues associated with that.
A lot of crosswalks on one I bought, and then when ODOT repaved just a couple years ago, and then they went back and removed.
I know. And I know that was part of because their current standard only likes them so far apart. But because ODOT has agreed that one of the things that they would like to do as part of your TSP is actually review and redo the programmatic agreement that they have with Cascade Locks on this road, this is a perfect opportunity to actually talk with them about additional crosswalks and propose additional crosswalks that they can include in that new programmatic agreement.
Amanda, where's that second picture taken from? I can't,
That's right across from the Best Western.
is it?
Yeah.
Oh, to the Circle Park. That sidewalk's really skinny on that
Yeah.
side.
Wouldn't the bridge be behind you then? I'm confused.
I think the picture's flipped.
Yes, I do
Yeah.
think
So the picture's flipped. The cars are on the wrong side. But I know what that sidewalk is. It's definitely the slope. If you were walking on it down towards downtown, would be on your right. So the cars are backwards. That car's backwards.
Okay, all right.
I don't know why it's flipped, but yeah. That sidewalk is only, I think, about 2.5 feet wide at that point. And it would require a retaining wall to get it wider. So I understand why it's not. You would have to cut into the hill and put a retaining wall to get it in there. I believe the sidewalk that is in the middle, the third from the left photo, that curb cut is actually something that ODOT is very concerned about. And actually, they have a complaint for ADA access along this sidewalk right now that they're trying to decide how they're going to address.
so. ODOT is in charge of the curb cuts on the sidewalk.
ODOT is in charge of the curb cuts in so much as there are access agreements and permits that they manage. So every one of these businesses has to have an access permit. And because they have an access permit for this driveway curb cut, whether its surfacing is part of that permit requirement. They're not required to replace it though, but they could potentially be targeting property owners to make them replace it if they have to come into compliance. Or hypothetically, they also could be able to find some money to help do that. And keep going. So in relation to streetscape and parking, and you obviously have kind of a lot of on-street parking. There are 176 striped or designated parallel parking spaces within the downtown study area. A lot of that is used by large vehicles and staff for extended use. So it restricts the number of parking spaces that are available for the public, for visitors. And there, of course, is no, at this point, public off-street parking that is designated, although there are a number of potential lots that could be. There are a couple of solutions that we're going to be proposing that are linked to these issues later. Next. Um, Wayfinding is something that Caroline is going to talk about later. These are just some examples of existing wayfinding that may or may not be very effective or is missing entirely. We heard a lot that needs to be additional signage for the restrooms that are on Main Street. And if there is public parking, we need identifying where that public parking is so that people can find it quickly. And then, of course, the signage and the access to the PCT, as important as it is really limited. So I think there's a lot of room for improvement there. Next.
I'm not even sure who's responsible for the PCT signage. It's not the city, I know that.
Right. Well, the city can should certainly include PCT signage within its wayfinding along downtown. The actual signage that goes to the trail itself is almost certainly somebody else, but that's a good question as to who that somebody else is. Dave, do you have any idea?
Years ago, the city of Cascade Locks did do a rare project to get a bunch of signage put throughout our town that identified where the trail was and everything. But I've seen those posts that are there, and the signs have been broken off. So there is signage.
Mm.
It's just, if the sign breaks, it doesn't get fixed. There's no longer signage now.
That was a rare program. Jordan, would you happen to know if there's a documentation of that anywhere at the city as far as where those signs were?
I'd have to look. Yeah, I don't know off the top of my head.
Homework.
Yep,
You can-
right.
Cool. Thank you. Something we can also ask ODOT and the Columbia Gorge if they actually put up signs or they just encourage other people to do so. Okay, next one. Temporary commercial uses. This is associated with that thing that people want to do something about food carts and market pods. These are just two pictures of the existing temporary commercial uses that are along downtown. And why I put illegal in here at all is that they may or may not actually be following the city's standards for temporary commercial in both cases. And the one particularly that's underneath the bridge is actually on ODOT property, not even on the motel property. And technically, they're not supposed to be on ODOT property at all. So I think what we'll be looking for is more of a solution that would make them legal and assist in sort of controlling that and refining how the city addresses temporary commercial uses. Okay, next. Public spaces. These are just a few examples of the public spaces downtown, including the connection or the trail, the walking path from downtown up to the PCT. And of course, the beautiful mural underneath the bridge that is at this point kind of needs to be repainted and retouched. And then the public park space plaza. Jordan, do you even have a name for that? That's in front of the county building?
Not really. I think it's just the downtown plaza.
Yeah, there's a big opportunity there, though, for redevelopment. And of course, we have poor access to Marine Park, which is not photoed, but we'll talk about that later. All right. I'm going to pass the baton over to Ellie, and she's going to walk through an exercise with you all. And I really do encourage you to comment and participate. Cool. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, please feel free to interrupt me at any point or chime in. I'll try to make some spaces for conversation. But part of what I wanted to talk to you all about today is to kind of frame this discussion around the idea of cohesion and a cohesive downtown and what makes a downtown feel cohesive. So we've heard different communities come up in our conversations. And I think a lot of times people jump to the idea of architecture as making a downtown feel cohesive. And that's one part of the conversation. But I wanted to sort of expand that out to consider some other things. So some of the specific communities that have come up at the open house or in other conversations with folks in the community, people really like Leavenworth, really cohesive downtown. Sisters, as a closer to home example, is a pretty cohesive downtown that comes up when people talk about a small community that has a vibrant downtown space. We've also heard Government Camp come up as a sort of architectural precedent for some of the standards and architectural design for Cascade blocks. And so these are just sort of three examples that maybe we've had in mind and that other folks have had in mind. Yeah, we can go on to the next slide. But we really want to highlight that, yes, architecture can play a big part in this, but they're really only a part of the way that downtowns can feel cohesive. And I would say really only a part of the reason that these three spaces have a feeling of cohesion. There's a lot more going on there. And so we're going to dive into a little bit of that now. So if you've been to Sisters recently, I was just there this last weekend taking many of the photos that you'll see in this slide. You will notice that there is a thematic element to not just the architecture, but really kind of everything that's happening in that downtown space. And they call it the Western Frontier theme. So it's not just sort of strictly controlled design standards, but they have a theme to them. And you will see a lot of cohesion in things like building height. You'll see consistent signage, these non-illuminated signs that you see in this image. You'll see architectural details that fit with that Western theme. You'll see a unified color palette, and you'll see, the buildings are right up on the sidewalk, so there's not much setback there. So there's a lot of things going on with the architecture that do make this space feel cohesive. But I would argue, if you look at these two photos, the photo on the left, yes, you see cohesive buildings, but it's really this image on the right here that shows so much more of what's going on in Sisters that really, to me, I'd rather hang out on what you see in that photo on the right. Because there's a lot of other stuff that's happening there. And so we're going to walk through some of that now. Before we talk through some of those specific streetscape elements, I did want to just note one of the reasons why we're wanting to expand this discussion out from architecture exclusively. In Cascade Blocks, there are some challenges about relying too heavily on architecture to create this kind of cohesive aesthetic. In part, there just isn't a huge repository of existing historic buildings to draw on and be inspired by. And so it's hard to sort of create that aesthetic from scratch. As you've seen in some of the images already, and as you know, of course, from your time on the street, the buildings are not all right up on the sidewalk in many places the same way that they are somewhere like Sisters. There's different setbacks and sort of, we don't have these same sort of cohesive blocks and obviously a lot of vacant lots as well. We're also working with a pretty wide right-of-way, which sort of separates the two sides of the street. And because of ODOT's management of this space, there's some limitations to the kinds of changes we can make to that, although we do hope that there will be some opportunities there as well. One of the biggest reasons, though, that relying on architecture to create a unified aesthetic for downtown can be a challenge is because new development takes time. And even if all of those vacant lots that Caroline pointed out, magically got buildings on them tomorrow, there's still existing buildings that are not going to conform. And so just the process of sort of turning over building stock into a new aesthetic is a time-consuming, even if the money and the will is there, is a time-consuming endeavor. And finally, I think it's worth pointing out that having really stringent design guidelines will slow down growth and development. So the harder we make it for people to build things, the slower it's going to go, and maybe the fewer people who are going to, be able and willing to navigate that system. And I'll just note that is sort of in conflict. There's sort of a tension there because, what we saw in that survey was that people actually maybe were okay with it slowing down a little. But so we just want to note that there's, I think there's more of a discussion to be had around that point. But we just, wanted to expand this discussion out to think of maybe it doesn't have to be just architectural cohesion or, we slowed development down all the way. Maybe there's a way we can kind of get that cohesion that people are looking for while also really making sure that there's opportunities for development. Maybe before we go through this list of other options, I'm just curious if anyone has any thoughts or comments about this framing before we move on to talking about some of the opportunities we see for creating a cohesive downtown streetscape. Okay, great. Well, let's move on to looking at some other strategies. So, in addition to architectural cohesion, which of course is, I think, part of the discussion and something we're excited to talk about, we really want to sort of shift some of that emphasis, though, over to other ways that we can start to meet that goal. And so, some of the ideas that we'd like to explore tonight are the idea of unifying streetscape design elements. We'll spend a bit of time on that. The idea of facade improvements and thinking of ways to rehab existing structures or sort of incentivize aesthetic changes for buildings that already exist. Thinking about improvements to public spaces, some of which we've already shown photos of. Rezoning to sort of help create a more cohesive space, consolidating and developing a better parking strategy, and then wayfinding signage. And we will actually wrap up a little bit talking about building architecture, because that is a piece of it as well. But I wanted to highlight that there's so much more we can do to make a really vibrant and exciting downtown besides just the buildings. So as I said, I have spent some time in Sisters recently, and one of the things that makes that a really cool place to stay is that they have spent a lot of time thinking about having a really vibrant and pedestrian-friendly streetscape. And I want to sort of note before we go through these examples that I'm not necessarily using Sisters because, well, I'm definitely not using it as an example because we want Cascade Locks to look like Sisters, because don't think that would necessarily be the right aesthetic choice. And not even because they're necessarily doing everything correct. They have their own set of challenges. But I think in this particular arena, there's a lot of good things that are happening here. And so I think it can be a good case study in what a town of just a few thousand people who have a similar, pretty major highway through the middle of their downtown, who are similarly situated in a very aesthetic, sort of natural beauty, area of natural beauty, have done to sort of tackle that same set of challenges that are sort of similar to what we're facing here in Cascade Locks. So one of the things you'll see if you walk around Sisters is that there's just a lot of decorative elements that take the streetscape and make it feel like when you're walking around, brings it down to your scale. So instead of just a giant wide road and giant buildings, there's these smaller details like flower baskets, banners, lighting, trash cans, and those are cohesive throughout the town. And so they provide continuity as well as providing infrastructure for people walking around. You'll also see a lot of seating options, so benches, seat walls, ways for people to linger within the space. We talked a little about wayfinding. They have these nice unified wayfinding signs that point to major destinations, and they also have sort of chosen to stick with their theme in even just their standard street signs. Another thing that you will notice if you even drive through Sisters, even if you don't walk around, there are many pedestrian crosswalks, certainly to the point where it can actually be quite challenging to make a left turn, or even just to get cars through. They have definitely decided to prioritize pedestrian, the pedestrian experience, maybe even at times over kind of vehicular movement through. And that's its own sort of set of challenges, but the distance between their crosswalks is quite small. They also have actually substituted pavers instead of concrete sidewalks in the downtown core. So you have this feeling of you're in sort of a special pedestrian space, and they've also brought in decorative plantings in corners and areas between parking spaces to add more visual interest to the ground plane as well. And then they also have vertical elements that provide shade. So they have these really wide awnings that in places span actually the entire width of the sidewalk. They also have street trees in many areas. And so these provide both sort of shading, of course, but they also provide screening from the street and from traffic. So that's sort of a benefit to pedestrians as well. And they also have several very small little plazas and green spaces that, like the benches and seating, provide opportunities for people to meet and socialize and hang out in these spaces. And so these are just a couple shots of how these elements work together, seeing them in concert. And what you'll notice is just that there's a lot of sort of dynamism and ways that people can interact with these spaces in different ways. And so, the Sister Streetscape has plenty of challenges and problems of its own, but I think that from the experience of being a pedestrian, there's a lot to learn from how all of these different elements sort of show up in space together. And so I think maybe before we move on, I just wanted to see if any of these particular elements, or maybe even other elements that you can think of, are things that feel like you could envision sort of being a value add to the streetscape in Cascade Locks. And not everything works in every context, and so this is not sort of like a one size fits all solution that just because these things are helpful in Sisters that they're necessarily helpful here. But I think it's a good starting point for starting to think about the kinds of elements that we might use to make a more both pedestrian friendly and visually unified downtown.
I'm curious what like the speed limit is through Sisters on the highway, and what other things they do with the street itself to kind of calm traffic through there. In my experience, I just had two instances today, like outside this morning. It was an otherwise kind of cool, calm, quiet morning, and then there was a truck, big semi idling for 5 minutes, just rumbling right across the street, and then having lunch at the drive-in, a truck with no muffler flying through town and making all this noise and smelly stuff. Like no number of picnic tables, benches, plazas would like overcome that like fundamental flaw that the use of the street is incompatible with people enjoying the area around the street, in my opinion. So I'm curious if there's anything we can learn from Sisters on how they handle that.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. And I do think that so I actually don't know off the top of my head what the posted speed limit is, though it's low. I would imagine it's 25. And honestly, part of the reason I don't know is because Sisters has pretty bad traffic problems. And so you almost never are in a situation where you're able to go the posted speed because you're often stopped in traffic. Realistically, I don't think that they have the same truck issue that is obviously a challenge for y'all in Cascade Locks. But I think that, yeah, certainly there are real challenges with that, and I think that truck traffic is really something that that we're thinking about. We're certainly thinking about ways to have truck parking not right in downtown, and to move that or to try to relocate that. I don't know, Amanda, do you have anything you want to add about truck traffic on the road?
It's an interesting issue in so much as that technically, I believe that a long vehicle are actually supposed to be forbidden within the historic highway. So technically, ODOT's could sign and then start enforcing if there was a mechanism to enforce the restriction to actually not allow large trucks on this portion of Wanapa at all. Now, I don't know that the city actually wants to go that far or to encourage ODOT to actually enforce that. The reason they haven't done it, ODOT hasn't done it thus far, is because they don't have a mechanism to enforce it. So there would need to be some agreement that becomes something that everybody wants to enforce. I think alternately, at least getting them off of parking on the street and taking up prime real estate with long vehicles, where tourists would probably be more easy, it would turn over much faster. It would be something that we want to look at. But I agree that I think it's probably 25 miles per hour through downtown. Sisters, that is, yeah.
Yeah.
I,
One of the
go ahead, Dave.
Oh yeah, I was just gonna say one of the things I like about Sisters is how the pedestrians have like their own safe space. I feel like in some of the photos whereas I feel like so much of our sidewalks are just so exposed to cars parking and traffic going right by. You know, a lot of we already touched on it earlier, but the those gas stations that have just kind of a continuous curb, you know, it's not really that safe of a place to walk as a pedestrian. You know, I've seen cars just flying in there, disregarding the fact that people are walking there and just cut you off. And it's like, well, wait a second, like, you know, that space should be protected for the pedestrian, and you know, there should be people parking on the sidewalk because they, you know, have a big trailer and they can't get into the gas station or something. It really, I like how Sisters has a defined pedestrian zone that makes it so people can park and walk down the street to a different business.
Yeah, and I think that that sort of idea of access management, limiting where people are actually able to drive their cars through both repaving so that there are actually curbs that are actually protecting people, and also, you know, I think the opportunity for street trees, well, that can be challenging to implement. I think as these sidewalks are being re-envisioned is something that you know, providing that kind of vegetative buffer both visually but also just like very practically to sort of claim space and say like everything on this side is for the pedestrian can be a really valuable tool.
And I was thinking, the banners, the, benches, would be an easy, less expensive way to show some placemaking and placemaking signs as well as interpretive signs. We have so much history walking down Wanapa and looking that there could be interpretive signs even before there's development. I like that. I like this, what Dave mentioned is the planting and trees dividing the sidewalk and the cars or the bike lanes. And then this idea of extended awnings, I think, is great and would be really great if we had more buildings to protect the folks from sun and snow.
Rain.
And rain, but I'm thinking snow in the winter, you know, the plowing pushes it up. So actually having a green space there, so plowed snow was on the green space, the awning, so that the restaurant and business owners had less work trying to clear in front of their space. But those are good ideas, as well as somewhere, some public parking off street that was well signed. Flowers, I don't know that they're a great idea because someone has to maintain them and water them. I like them, but I'd start with banners and flowers on the ground.
Yeah, all great ideas, and we will get to parking in a minute because yes, I think it's great to claim space for pedestrians, but we also have to figure out where the cars go to make that work. So yeah. Okay, well, why don't we go ahead and move on from here? So in addition to improvements in the streetscape itself, we did want to highlight some other opportunities for creating cohesion. So something that a lot of communities have had success with are facade improvement programs. So these are images from Sandy, sort of before and after of a building that's undergone facade improvements. And so these kinds of programs are, you know, flexible in how we set them up, but the idea is basically that you know, the city supports through matching funds or through some other mechanism business owners and property owners who want to do sort of exterior modifications to their building. So in this case, in Sandy, obviously they're, well, maybe not obviously, but if you know Sandy, obviously the specific modifications that were made adhered to some pretty stringent design standards, but that's not necessary to implement one of these programs. So it could be in line with something very strict like Sisters, but it could also be things that just allow people to be able to fund repainting their building or adding an awning. And so that's a good way to start thinking about how we take existing buildings that maybe are not looking their best at the moment, and making it possible for them to be real assets to the streetscape. And then we wanted to highlight some specific public spaces that have already come up, I think earlier, but opportunities to think through some of these sort of pocket areas. This obviously does not address the loud trucks making them not fun to hang out in challenge. This is sort of something we'll talk about later, but just thinking about really the space itself and how different areas might be more friendly to pedestrians or to really any community member who is spending time downtown. So the Overlook Park, we were really drawn to it, obviously, because of the view. The lack of shade, especially when we were there, was pretty notable. And so thinking about how to make that a little more hospitable and also to sort of improve the connection from the streetscape, since there is a pretty wide swath of pavement that you have to traverse to get over there, and at least some wayfinding signage to draw people out there. The plaza we already talked about a little as a really great opportunity area that right now is seems to be pretty underutilized for what an amazing location that is. And then finally, that connection we all know about to Marine Park, and thinking about how to make that both more improve continuity and also obviously safety for pedestrians. All right.
Yeah. I was gonna say, can I just wondering if you all have a thought as to which one of these would be more important? Are they equally important? Are none of them important? What are you thinking?
Are you talking out of these three locations?
Yeah, well, just as a starting point, yeah.
I think Overlook Park's a real opportunity because that parking, there's so little of it. It's like a drop in the bucket compared to like the existing parking in Cascade lots, and even on because it's technically like 30-minute free parking, even on busy town, it's underutilized. Since there already is a bit of a pedestrian and bike focus in that park with the public restrooms, the little bike station, the maps, I feel like taking back more of that space, especially if there's plans that we may talk about later about adding parking somewhere else for Overlook Park to become more of a public pedestrian centric space and get rid of that parking to the extent possible. I think could be a good opportunity.
For me, I think the plaza at the bus stop, because it's one of the few properties the city owns, so we could do something with it. It's overgrown, so there has been some houseless folks living in there occasionally. I know that Tiffany, who owns the hair salon behind there, has had to lock her door to keep one particular houseless person from trying to come in all the time. So if I've only been here 3 years, and we used to have a sculpture. I forgot what happened to it. Now that's gone. It's completely unutilized. At least Overlook Park has a purpose. People go drive in there to get their mail. They drive in there to run across and get coffee. They take pictures. I live where I can see Overlook Park, so I see it all the time. And it's those restrooms are needed for the people who drive through town. A lot of folks stop and get out and take pictures and that circle back. So my first thing would be the plaza connection to Marine Park. Yeah, that's a lot of wasted space, and I feel like the port would be very involved in that. Whereas we at the city have the ability to make a plan for the plaza, the bus stop. Anyway.
Yeah, I agree with the plaza, definitely underutilized. I think it'd be a great food pod area or food cart area.
Yeah.
And there's parking behind it. I don't know who owns the parking
Where's
behind it.
that? I don't recognize that. The plaza at bus stop.
You know, right in front of the courthouse and in front of Tiffany's hair salon. The locks. Oh,
It's right next to the market.
we call it a plaza. It's a lot of landscaping right now.
Yeah.
used to be
Yeah.
like a, like,
And concrete. It's a lot of concrete right now.
is that an empty spot there?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay,
if we,
I think somebody owned that, right?
well,
Yeah, right now the city owns it.
we
Well,
own
that
the landscaping area and where the statue used to be, but we don't own the building.
Correct.
the empty lot, between the,
I think she's thinking the one that's on a previous photo. It's the flat ground space that goes between this building and the back parking lot
Yeah, does somebody own that? Yeah, I know what you mean, the lot between the courthouse and
Uh-huh.
and the grocery store. Yeah.
Correct, there's one, a person or couple that owns from the back of the grocery store all the way to the Cascade and the entire strip mall. And I can't remember their names off the top of my head.
And it's not Tiffany and Dawn.
no,
No,
I think the empty spot there, I think one of the, I think he passed away, he's an engineer, I don't know, his name.
I don't
It's
remember.
like a very, vacant space, between the, the closed house and, the right house and it's just a small, empty space like that.
It'd be interesting to get in touch with the owner. Yeah.
Mhm.
Is that one?
Yeah, I mean, I think all three obviously have their worth. The most difficult one is gonna be a connection to Marine Park, because the railroad's a giant pain in the butt when you try and do anything with them. But I don't know when.
So Jordan, I mean, obviously the railroad's a major pain, but would it be worth it to even just address the current path to getting to the underpass because it's not ADA accessible? Or do you want it to only if you can, I mean, are we reaching for the moon to get to literally a safe pedestrian crossing over the railroad? Or in this case, would it be worth looking at a solution that would just get people down from Wanapa down without having to along where the current narrow paving path is? If it would it be worth it to try to do some sort of snaking accessible path down?
I got you. I would think so.
Yeah, it doesn't solve all the problems, but it solves one of the problems.
Who owns that greenway where the path is? Does the
That's the
port?
port.
Okay.
It's the ports. So yes, the port would absolutely have to be involved, but as they are also doing a strategic plan right now, I mean, or they just did one. It's potential that that could be something that we could certainly highlight in the plan as something that we would love to look at. As far as ADA accessibility, the current path is absolutely not.
Great. Well, I think all of that was really helpful for us. And I think clearly Amanda was foreseeing something because in our meeting earlier this week, she was like, wouldn't that be a great food cart pod area at the plaza? So great minds think alike, I guess. Yeah, Amanda, I guess I'll hand it back over to you for the next.
All right. So a couple of the other things that have come up over the times, and we certainly I think this was mentioned at our last meeting, was the concept of actually consolidating some of the zones within the development code and the comp plan along this corridor to help with part of that of the actual cohesion of downtown. This map is not incredibly easy to see, but you'll see all the orange, which is the downtown. And then the two pieces on either end are red and that are demarcated as commercial. And then there's also one part of downtown, which is currently is actually a couple of lots that are listed as commercial residential. So within the area that we've been looking at in photos, you have three different zoning classifications. And you also have light industrial, which is that a port area down to the marine park, but also it actually stretches quite a lot of that frontage. That's opposite City Hall.
Well, that it was all owned by the railroad.
Yeah, so that's all owned by the railroad. But when I was looking at the development code, most of the standards for downtown commercial and commercial residential regarding architecture or review are exactly the same. So there are huge parts of those codes that don't change at all. The only difference is actually part of the list of uses. So for of those three zones, there are slightly different uses allowed within the three zones. But once you're in the zone, none of the rest of the standards are all the same. So I would propose consolidating the three zones into one zone that has the same standards and then has a slightly broader list of uses that encapsulates all the uses that we have heard that people want to be able to see downtown, which would include commercial as well as mixed use residential. And then um, it's really look closely at whether or not we want to continue to allow single family residential within the downtown corridor as an allowed permitted use. I would recommend not, but that would convert. There are a couple of existing single family homes that are in the downtown area that are already non-conforming. And there's one that sits on one of the residential commercial ones that's, I think, partially conforming. But so it doesn't really actually change the status of any of the existing uses very much. So consolidating the zones wouldn't make anything non-conforming that isn't already non-conforming. So that's just something I think that we should do. I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that right now, or if it seems outside of the purview of this project.
I think that y'all are well educated in this and listening to the needs of the community, both with our strategic plan and this. So I value your recommendation.
Jordan, do you have any concerns about it?
No, not at all. I think the end goal of this is to make it easier for businesses to come into Cascade Locks, and whatever that ends up being, it needs to be done. So if it's design standards, rezoning, whatever it is.
And the rezoning is as a start of modifying the standards, because there's no point in trying to do it three times. If all the standards are the same for all three zones, we might as well just change them once if we're going to make changes. So by consolidating them, we only need to make one change for those, which would be nice.
Does it allow for second floor housing on commercial or retail space?
The current code allows that in both downtown and commercial. It's questionable whether or not it allows it in the commercial residential zones. So that would be one of the modifications. We would allow it in this consolidated zone. Yes.
I think that's important. Thank you. I think Tom had a question or comment.
Oh, I had to think about it's a lot, but
Yeah. Um, Well, what I will do for our next meeting or before then, I will come up with a consolidated code that sort of shows what it would look like. And then we can talk really specifically about what kind of impacts that might have on individual buildings. But I think because the code is actually so aligned on both of them that it's actually not going to have a lot of changes. What it will do is allow a developer to come in and only have one code to look at rather than trying to figure out which one they're supposed to be addressing. So it should at least start that process of simplifying the code. Okay, next, parking. The big thing. So I recognize that parking is one of the things that we're going to have to address in order to address anything else. Because as much as we might want to improve pedestrian and bicycle infrastructure and the atmosphere of downtown when it's from a pedestrian point of view, if we don't deal with the parking, then we can't really do that. We also can't attract future development if our parking standard is such that it doesn't allow enough space on the lots to actually do a development. So I'm looking at sort of recommending a sort of a set or a suite of parking strategies that I think together will address a lot of these things, and hopefully none of them except at this point will cost a lot. There are some longer range ideas that could cost more, but at this point they're all really low hanging fruit, which would include the city taking a leadership role and actually going and working with a couple of the private property owners. Ton, I think one of yours is maybe it, to just do a temporary lease or a 1 year lease or however long lease that the city wants to negotiate with and the property owners are comfortable with, to start using some of these properties that aren't being used right now for parking for off-street parking for the public. So it would be signed for use for off-street parking for the public, and we would have part of our wayfinding signage would encourage people to park there. Those lots would remain private, but the city would support their either paving, striping, and through a fee or through doing all of the work themselves as part of the negotiation. So it could be a fee simple lease. It could be just a opportunity to work together to improve the space. And then, but we're not really talking at this point about the city buying those lots. We're just talking about them basically borrowing them until such time as future development might want to use them for something else. So it would be an immediate release valve for parking needs downtown. One of the things that those off-street parking spaces could do is be used for employee parking. You could issue actually employee parking permits for those lots and make them basically have all of the employees who work downtown park there rather than dispersing through the residential neighborhoods adjacent to downtown. We know that we receive a lot of concerns and complaints from some of the residents adjacent to downtown that people are parking in front of them. Some people don't care. Some people obviously care. So it sort of depends on who you talk to, I think. But if we could provide a location that is well lit and easy to access from the businesses so people aren't feeling unsafe going at night and when the bars close or when the restaurants close to their parking, I think that would both improve both the employee morale and they'd have some place to park, as well as solve some of our on-street parking issues as far as turnover. If an employee is working an 8-hour shift, comes and parks in front of a business, you're not going to be able to get them back anytime soon. And you may have had 8 different visitors come during that time period, or even more, as a much more fast turnover elsewhere along the street. The sign in the middle actually kind of references that. The Dalles actually does this. They have a couple of lots that they have designated as public parking that the city doesn't own. They're just leaseholders. But because they have those, they have employee parking there and they have customer parking only on the main street. So it's an option, definitely. Alternately, one of these, or as well, one of these lots could actually be designated for off-street large vehicle parking. We haven't, I kind of wanted to float that idea out there before you all, before we actually start trying to figure out which lot might actually flow better for off-street large vehicles, because we know that that's actually a big circulation issue. So we haven't, I mean, the staff haven't really targeted where that might be, but if that's something you want to look for, we can certainly look for an option for that. Of course, we definitely we need parking signage and wayfinding. So if we identify even temporary lots that are going to be used for public parking, we want to make sure there's a way to direct people there. We also want to make that wayfinding signage flexible enough that if we change where that public parking goes, we can reroute it. And as part of this entire thing, I definitely am going to be looking at changes to the development code about parking lots, access management, shared parking agreements, and those types of things to try to encourage people to be able to work together to address some of these parking space requirements and issues, but also to look potentially at how we actually make sure that we're opening up the opportunity to infill some of these lots. Because some of the lots, particularly like the one where the building was demolished next to the Thirsty Cafe, are small enough that if you have to do all of the on-street parking or on-site off-street parking that the code currently requires, then they would never be able to develop. And although I heard during the open house that several times that people were assuming that you got credit for on-street parking against your parking need, I didn't find that anywhere in the code. So there are some things in the code that we need to clean up as part of that. So questions, thoughts about parking? What have we missed? What else are we thinking?
I like all your ideas. Would your code include the placemaking aspect that trying to put parking behind your building so that the storefronts face Winnapa instead of a big parking lot?
Yeah, that's actually in the code right now for the downtown district, and I would recommend keeping that.
And then what about oh, I lost it. Sorry, forgot.
Is there any discussion of paid pricing strategies where maybe the sections of the street that are the busiest for parking, you know, Best Western down to Marine Park entrance would be paid if it didn't have like a local resident permit, and then free parking would be available in the parts of town where there's almost always free public parking available, basically here and the little outside of City Hall, that stretch, and then down at the cemetery lot, and you kind of push. I mean, that would solve the employee parking problem, right? If they had to pay versus walking 5 minutes from free parking further down the street. But that might encourage more people other than employees to park outside of the busiest part of town and then walk into or bike
Um, I think without providing some off-street parking as one of the options, what all you're doing is shoving the parking to a different location. By only if we were to introduce paid parking in some areas versus others. Um, what typically cities go through a stage process where they have all free parking, and then they will put in hour restrictions. So they'll do 2 hour or 3 hour turnover restrictions, and then after they get to a certain traffic need, or which actually there's a threshold in the international code that is 75%. If your parking spaces are filled 75% of the time, then you start looking at whether or not you should have paid parking or requirements for paying. I think we would want to step up to that, and we could certainly illustrate how you would do that. So you would start with where you are, which is free parking, and then you go to the next is actually putting 2 hour time restrictions on certain areas that have the most need for turnover, which could be along the main portion of Wanapa, and then you go from there to adding paved. I wouldn't jump immediately to pay, mostly because people will freak out. I don't know
Dave,
that your city council would ever adopt it
I
that
suggested
quickly.
a way to create like a local permit where residents could get a free parking permit, and it was the out of town visitors who were paying for the parking. I guess
Yeah,
you're right that it would just relocate parking, but if part of the goal is to get cars, fewer cars turning in and out of lots and spending time in the kind of busy commercial section of town, and move those cars down to parts of town that don't have businesses operating right now, then maybe that relocation is part of the goal. But other things on this list, I think the top one, the taking underutilized lots and making them public parking would be most appealing, because then you're not creating parking lots. I just think like 6 months of the year, there's no problem with parking here. And I'd say even in my experience, there's outside of PCTA's weekend and half marathon weekend, there's not a shortage of parking in aggregate. It's just not always where people want to park closest to the thing they're going to. But like there are enough parking lots in town, or parking spots, even on a general
I'd
busy.
agree. Yeah, there's a lot of parking, actually. 176 parking spaces is a lot of on-street parking. It's just directing people to use it. What do you all think? What does everybody else think about paying, or alternately
Yeah,
signing for time restrictions?
I think first off, I think identifying the spaces that we have now is an instant boost in the total number of spaces that we need in this town. I know in front of the Chinese American place, that's where the bus stop used to be. It was painted yellow. It was never returned back to parking. Likewise, that whole strip there with gas stations, we've already talked about this, but since it's a rolling curb, there's really no on-street parking there, even though there should be. As well as when you go up into the neighborhoods from downtown, there's a lot of signs that say, you can't park here, this and that, because people don't want people parking on the public parking in front of their house, which, it's public parking at the end of the day. So just identifying those as like, hey, there's actually all this available parking. We just need to like make sure it's striped correctly, make sure that it's curbed correctly. I think it's one of the low hanging fruits. On top of that, I think the other thing with a shared parking agreement, our business has always been willing to share parking, because I think customer to Thunder Island Brewing is very well a customer to the fish market or any other business in town and vice versa. One of the challenges that we've had and a lot of other businesses have is actually in the wintertime is snow removal. So I wonder if tying in a shared parking agreement as almost like a shared management plan of parking could be very convincing to a lot of business owners that have to deal with snow removal in the wintertime and end up having a big problem with it. And it would also cut down the cost for all of us if we hire one person to do all the snow removal for town and one person to, recoat all the surfaces in town. I think a lot of business owners would say, oh, if I join this program, then I can share my parking and then we'll all share costs and we'll all share maintenance. And it's something that I don't have to worry about anymore. Just taking the cost and it's going to save me a lot of money if I join this program. So those are my two thoughts.
I think that's great. I love the idea of taking it beyond just a couple of properties and actually making it a district-wide program that people can elect to participate in and then support that way and support each other doing this. I think that's great. It might be something, Denise, that Main Street could actually take on as a leadership role in running.
Yeah, I'd like to talk to business owners. And Dave, I appreciate your thoughts. What are your thoughts, Dave, on timed parking? That could keep people moving. Do you like 2 hours or 3 hours, or what works for you if you had timed parking in front of your space?
Yeah, I'm all for that. I think that's a great idea, and I think also identifying that central employee parking space are two big things to increase customer turnover in businesses. We try to encourage our employees to park off property. Of course, at nighttime, we allow the closing shift to always park on our lot, so they don't have to walk in the dark to their car. Yeah, I think timing the street parking would be great, and yeah, I think that's a great idea. And then creating a safe place for employees to park the car is also a great addition.
Cool. All right. Yeah, and let's not worry about the changes to the development code. We can talk about those later. Next. I know we're getting really close to the end of it. So I actually want to give this over to Caroline. And we probably tonight, I'm just going to say, we're not going to get to architecture. And I think that's okay because we've got a lot to digest first. But Caroline.
Cool. All right. So we wanted to talk to you guys about entry signage. Right now, we have a couple places that welcome people to Cascade Locks. We've got our sign that greets you from the highway entrance, but it's not super noticeable both in location or design. And then we also have the mural under the bridge and the little overlook parking lot there. But again, could utilize some more sort of like enticing elements to these entry, or it's just sort of like welcoming points to Cascade Locks. So we were looking at sort of alternative and existing signage within Oregon cities that already exist. We have Pendleton and government camp signs are very thematic. They sort of just like utilize elements from the themes of the town that are pretty obvious. And then we really enjoyed this sort of entryway to Florence's old town. These sort of like artistic structural pillars we thought were really interesting. And we kind of liked how they were on both sides of the street. So it was sort of like an encompassing entryway rather than just sort of like to the side of the street. So more noticeable and sort of like artistically interesting.
And I'll point out that that meets ODOT standards because it doesn't have a top, so you don't have to worry about it being too high or too low for various vehicles.
So we were wondering what everyone thought about entry signage, if the idea of utilizing a more thematic approach, like the signage of the Pacific Crest Trail or the sort of infrastructure of the Bridge of the Gods was something they wanted to utilize in entry signage, or if like just a less thematic approach, something more simple, some like sort of what already exists was what people were interested in, or if anyone had any thoughts altogether.
I didn't even know we had that welcome to Cascade Lock sign. I've never, it's never
When you
struck
come,
my eye.
you come off Portland up the freeway.
It's typically covered by vegetation. You can't see it half the year.
One
Say, I work
year,
in Portland. I make that drive a lot.
I know, one year GCC went with, and cleaned it up with Jeremiah and the woman that used to be there. You know, spent a day, it was a lot of work, so nobody's budgeted to clean it up. To support on that land?
It's, yeah, port property, yeah.
I like the idea of an entrance sign and, come on back. I love the neon in Bandon, North Bend. You know what I'm talking about, that big
Yeah.
arch, 1950s, but, so the backside, particularly on both ends. Now, the Bridge of the Gods, Highway 84, Circle Park, Bridge side, traffic disaster is frightening. We know that people are going to get run over any minute trying to cross the PCT or whatever. And the tiny sidewalk on one side, and I don't think there's a crosswalk there. I don't know.
No.
Anyway, so where would you put that entrance sign there? I don't know, and then at the other end by the cemetery or the fire station, whatever, I hope it would slow cars down, because you go to the coffee cart right there, you order one coffee, and during that time you will see at least 5 cars speeding through. They come off the highway and they are going 55, 65 right past City Hall, and then the people that are getting ready to go on the highway are already catching their speed up. So if we're looking to the future when our downtown comes all the way down here, I would like the signage there, and then like welcome, and then the lower speed limit, of course, 25 right away. So I don't have an opinion on design. Maybe other folks here have an opinion on the design, but I do like something that says you've entered downtown. Anyway, y'all have a design idea?
As an architecture. I said, as an architecture, who can do it? I mean, what minute we're not the art person, we can ask the.
Oh, an art person.
Yeah, well, yeah, I look at Ellie. I'm not the designer. I have other people who are much better.
But back to the overall theme we pick, which, is loosely Cascadia, that nobody can really define what that actually is, other than earth tones.
Yeah, that was, and what Gordon told me was that it was government camp was what they were thinking of when they said that.
Okay.
I think it's a really wholesome, like, pull from like the Native American history that we have here.
Mm.
Yeah, or and we have to bear in mind we get a lot of wind, so whatever it is has to withstand the wind, but like big metal sculpture with the fish, I don't know. Or you're right, those towers, if they had some Native American elements on them, as well as, I don't know what's on those towers.
Yeah, I think the Florence Towers are reminiscent of actually their notable bridge, which has a similar sort of design aesthetic. So I think they were drawing on another piece of local architecture. And so, yeah, it would actually be like quite in keeping with that sort of design approach to have something that's locally relevant. So I think, yeah, the towers are sort of like a substrate for putting something thematic on if you wanted.
Isn't it like Cascade Locks, the heart of the gorge?
Yes.
The heart of the gorge.
Oh,
So,
okay.
I mean, if you could almost like do some sort of like when you drive through, you would be like the river, right? And then like something coming up, like the Cascades on one side and whatever the
Nice.
Washington side's called.
Yeah. I mean, when you, at least for me and a lot of people I've talked to, and they think of Cascade Locks, they think of the Bridge of the Gods and how you extend the Bridge of the Gods into an architectural theme. I have no idea, but other than 1920s industrial.
It's definitely
Yeah.
doable. And I want y'all on my design team. I love that idea of the river or the road as a river and the
Hmm.
towers as the walls.
I,
Yeah.
I, I guess one thing I've always thought driving in though is because we kind of already have like an architectural entrance to our town, which is the bridge. Like you drive in, you look over, and you drive under it. Now I know that there's been issues in the past with when the bridge got downgraded back in like 2015 for the weight limit. We used to be able to put signs and everything up on the bridge, and then they said no more signs. Sorry, I'm holding a baby right now. They said no more stuff on the bridge. So that might be one thing that it's like, could we somehow work with the bridge that we have and just figure out an engineering upgrade to put a sign on the bridge? And then, you know, we used to hang banners from there, promoting events, all sorts of stuff. And then that engineering downgrade happened, and then they said no more to that. So
Maybe. I don't know how much money that would cost. That's a good question, but yeah, I can't answer that question. I don't think it addresses if we wanted to have one on both sides, though. We would still have the southern end, northern end. Okay, let's try this again. Eastern end. Get my directions correct.
I would like when people are coming from the east, Hood River and further east, they pull in that way. And I don't
Hmm.
think this end of town is not well defined. It's the cemetery and the city hall and the coffee cart. And, a very famous sculptor whose building is very quiet, so you don't know they're there. But as the town develops down here, I sure would like something welcoming folks in and saying you're downtown now. And we keep that going with banners and like you're downtown.
Hmm.
And on the sidewalks, the lap going back, you said one town, maybe Sisters did pavers. Do we have code or is it ever, um, who decides that you can paint murals or fun things on the sidewalk? Is that
I didn't find anything in the code that would prohibit painting on the sidewalks. The sidewalks are actually city infrastructure, not ODOT's. Um, Jordan, you can question or clarify that, but I didn't find anything in the code that would prohibit it, the painting of sidewalk. I didn't actually find anything I didn't read the sign code though, so can't answer the question about sign murals on walls.
Yeah, I can't think of anything off the top of my head.
so do we have a mural code for downtown? No, you don't see anything.
I will have to get back to you on that, Denise. Like I said, I didn't read the sign code, but it's one of the sections I kind of skipped. I can go back and look at it.
Because I think that is another way of placemaking affordably and getting art grants to do, whether it's dance here on the sidewalk and a hopscotch and,
Yeah.
then look this way to see Table Mountain. Just, and to say we're in downtown. This is where the painting begins and ends. This is a bench for you. This is a.
That'd be really cool if we did do like the food truck pod at the plaza with all the concrete to like paint hopscotch and things
Yeah.
like that for the kids. That would be an easy fun.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Have to go catch a bus. Thank you all. See you next time.
Okay.
Yeah, no,
Thanks for coming. Caroline, how much more do you have that you want to chat about?
I have like 3 wayfinding slides. Should we go with it or just do this another
I can
time?
just, do you all have another 5 minutes that you're willing to give?
I'm good.
I don't want, okay. I just want to respect your time. I know we're slightly over already. So, okay, go for it.
Okay, cool. So we already talked a little bit about wayfinding, just a lack of cohesion, and inconsistency of the design, and also we have some wayfinding structures that are not up to date. So like the one on the left, there are some businesses on this sign that don't exist anymore. So we definitely want to get those updated and preferably make them all cohesive. And yeah, Ellie already went over a little bit of like opportunities and existing alternatives. We have Pendleton has this kind of nice wayfinding design that still sort of encapsulates their thematic town element. And then we have some examples in Bend, some of these nice sort of like street sign arrow situations, and then more like visual map that still has some like town or city branding. So these are some interesting ideas for wayfinding. We also sort of talked amongst ourselves about utilizing the Columbia River Gorge design standards. To the left, we have some state trail guidelines, and then I found some sort of Xerox sign system pictures from 91, so they're a little hard to look at, but these are sort of like ideas of signage that go with the Columbia River Gorge design standards and could be utilized in wayfinding. Um, and then, yeah, I think it's sort of a similar conversation about as the sort of like entry signs, if we want a more thematic design for wayfinding or non-thematic modern approach. And then also just locations and what would be highlighted within a wayfinding system.
What do y'all think? I mean, using the Columbia Gorges system is, in one way, really simple because it already exists, and you could literally just go, "Here, this is what we're doing." But they also probably even have somebody who already builds those signs that you could contract with.
I kind of like that if you find that they are readable still. And I mean, Pendleton's was very easy to read, but I kind of like sticking with the Columbia Gorge. Anybody else? Same. And who is in charge of that? Like one gorge or?
As far as who would,
That is
I
the.
would go ahead, Dave.
I believe it's the scenic area.
Mhm.
I remember there was work done by them 10 years ago, all about trying to create a consistent signage with all the actually all the new the historic highway stuff,
Mhm.
consistent signage and everything.
Yeah, and we wouldn't be expecting Cascade Locks would not have to go to the Gorge River Commission to get permission to do this. They would just be borrowing their standards basically and replicating them. So it's not like you'd have to get the Gorge permission.
Do you like that, Dave, or do you like other ones?
Yeah, no, I love it, and yeah, I was just saying that I think they're the ones that wrote a big manual on all the different signages and archways that they have along the historic highway.
See, somebody's already done the work for us.
Mhm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if there's no other comments regarding this, that may be, Caroline, where we kind of lean in and maybe we can get some more examples and lean in a little bit on that and maybe make some recommendations as well as far as where they're going to go and what information we'd be trying to actually direct people to.
Great.
Okay. Jordan?
Yep.
I think I'm going to wrap up our presentation now. We were going to start talking a little bit about architectural styles, but I think we're over, so we're going to not right now. What I would like to do instead is maybe schedule a follow-up meeting with you all, and as well find out when the next public engagement are some public engagement opportunities really fast. I know there's a city fair that's coming up, and we would like to go back out to the public with some of the findings that we're doing, but I don't know if it's a little too early for that. So we might want to have another meeting in a month with you all and then look at developing some kind of public engagement opportunity after that. How do you think? Think that works?
Yeah, sounds good to me.
Okay. So it is what, the 21st of August? So we'd be looking at third week in September. Which is good because that's before the students had to go back and we have to start classes again on the 30th. Yikes. I don't know. Ellie, are you teaching this fall? No, right? So what I'll do is I'll come up with a couple of dates that work for Jordan and send them all out to you all. Do you have a strong preference as to whether or not it be in person, or did this format work?
This is fine.
Cool. Okay, well, thank you all for coming tonight. I really appreciate it. We'll put some notes together and then send Jordan's presentation as well as our notes, and so you can continue to participate. And if you have any thoughts, always please email me. I'm always open, and or give me a call. I'd love to chat. Or if you have other people that you think I should be talking to, please let me know. Thanks very much and have a great night.
Thank
Thanks,
you
Amanda.
all. Thank you.